The Whitmore Grand had a particular talent for making people feel like they were being evaluated the moment they stepped through its doors. It was in the lighting, warm, amber-hued, strategically angled, to catch the shimmer of evening gowns and the glint of cufflinks. It was in the staff, trained to direct their most attentive smiles toward the guests who arrived in black cars rather than taxis. And it was in the seating chart, which, at events like this one, the Hargrove Foundation annual charity gala, functioned less as a logistical courtesy and more as a public declaration of social standing. Table 1. Board members, founding donors, and the 2 senators who'd flown in from Washington. Table 2. Senior partners, legacy families, and the CEO of Meridian Capital. Table 7. Everyone else. Alexandra Holt did not sit at table 7. She never had. But this evening, for reasons that had been explained to her as a minor seating adjustment due to last-minute RSVP changes, she had been placed at table 4, not table 2, where she had sat for the past 3 consecutive years. But table 4, a round table near the east wall, where the candlelight was marginally dimmer, and the proximity to the kitchen slightly more apparent. She arrived at 7:14 p.m., 4 minutes before the program was scheduled to begin. Punctual, not eager. She had learned long ago that the first person to a table looked like they needed the validation of being seen, and the last person looked like they wanted the room to register their entrance. 4 minutes early was indifference. 4 minutes early said, "I have somewhere more important to be after this." She was 36 years old. She ran Holt Meridian Strategies, a firm she had built from a 2-desk operation in a shared Chicago office space into a 30-person consultancy that had, in the last fiscal year, generated more revenue than 3 of the companies it had consulted for. She wore a dark navy gown that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and wore it the way someone wears clothes that were simply clean without theater, without display. Her hair was pulled back. Her posture was the kind that wasn't learned at finishing schools but in rooms where she had been told, repeatedly, that she didn't belong. She found table 4 without assistance. And she found him. He was already seated, on the far left of the table, positioned slightly away from the cluster of name cards, as if he hadn't been sure he was in the right place. He was wearing a dark suit that was well cut but not new. Not the suit of a man who bought a new one for each gala, but the suit of a man who owned one good suit and maintained it carefully. His tie was a deep burgundy, knotted with competence but not flair. He looked, at a glance, like someone who had been brought by someone else, a brother-in-law perhaps, or a colleague who'd had a spare ticket and hadn't wanted it to go to waste. What made him noticeable was the child. The girl was perhaps 8 years old, sitting very straight in the chair beside him, wearing a white dress with small embroidered flowers at the collar. Her hair was braided, the kind of braid that a father does because there is no one else to do it. Not messy, not precise, but earnest. She had a small notebook in her lap. Not a phone, a notebook, with a pen clipped to the cover. Alexandra Holt sat down. She did not say anything immediately. Neither did he. The other seats at the table filled gradually. A woman in her late 40s named Courtney Fairfield, whose husband was on the foundation board, and whose voice carried the particular confidence of someone who had never been asked to leave a room. A man named Preston Walsh, whose teeth were too white and whose handshake would be too firm. A younger couple whose names Alexandra did not register and would not remember. The whispers began before the first course arrived. Courtney Fairfield leaned toward the woman on her right, a slender redhead named Diane Marsh, whose earrings cost what Alexandra recognized as approximately $14,000, and said something in a voice calibrated to be heard at the table but not beyond it. "I heard the Hendersons gave up their seats last minute. I suppose that explains the eclectic mix." Diane Marsh glanced at the man with the child. The glance lasted approximately 1.5 seconds. Then she smiled. The way people smile when they've made a joke they don't intend to acknowledge as a joke. "Networking has really changed," she said. At the head of the table, Preston Walsh made a sound that was not quite a laugh. The man in the good suit did not react. Alexandra Holt picked up her water glass. The evening had the shape of all such evenings. A welcome address from the foundation's chairwoman, a brief video about the program beneficiaries, A reminder that the silent auction items were available for viewing in the East Corridor. The kind of programming designed to give the room a sense of purpose before it returned to its real function, which was the maintenance of hierarchy through shared proximity and the performance of generosity. Alexandra was 4 minutes into her conversation with the man on her left, Preston Walsh, who had explained to her twice that he was in growth capital, as if the first explanation had been insufficient when Courtney Fairfield spoke again. "I don't mean to be rude," Courtney said, which was the precise preamble of someone who intended exactly that. "But is this a family night?" "I don't recall children being part of the program." The question was aimed across the table, vaguely, at no one and everyone. The girl with the notebook looked up. She had been writing something in neat, small script, and she paused, her pen still touching the page. The man in the good suit said, "She's with me." 3 words. The same 3 words someone says when they're standing in line at a grocery store and a friend catches up. Not defensive. Not apologetic. Just accurate. "Of course," Courtney said, smiling. "How sweet." The way she said sweet made it not sweet at all. Alexandra watched. She was good at watching. It was, in many ways, the central skill of her work, identifying what was actually happening in a room beneath what appeared to be happening. And what was happening here was choreographed. The seating arrangement, the glances, the precise calibration of Courtney Fairfield's voice. Someone had put this table together deliberately, and someone at this table was enjoying the arrangement. She looked at the man again. He was cutting his bread into small pieces, methodically, and placing them at the edge of the girl's plate without being asked. The girl picked one up and ate it without looking away from her notebook. There was a practiced economy to the gesture, the kind of small, unremarkable care that only happens between people who have been taking care of each other for a long time. Alexandra looked at his hands. He was not wearing a watch. There was a pale line on his left wrist, where a watch had been worn for many years and recently removed. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, without comment, without conclusion, filing it away. The second course arrived. Courtney Fairfield's voice arrived with it. "You know what I find fascinating?" she said, addressing the table at large but keeping her eyes on Diane Marsh in a way that indicated she was performing rather than conversing. "The way certain events have become so accessible. I remember when this gala had a waiting list that took 2 years to get off of. Gerald used to joke that the average net worth at Table 1 was enough to fund a small nation." Preston Walsh laughed. It was the laugh of a man who wanted to be included in the joke, even though he wasn't sure he understood it. Diane Marsh turned to look at the man in the good suit with an expression of theatrical curiosity. "Are you a donor? Or are you here with someone from the foundation?" The question had the structure of small talk. The content of it was something else. The man looked at her. He had dark eyes, the kind that took you in without appearing to, the way a room takes in light through a window that looks like a wall. "I'm a guest," he said. "Of course," Diane said, and looked away, and the look away was more insulting than the question. The girl with the notebook looked up from her writing. She looked at Diane Marsh, then at her father, then went back to her notebook. She wrote one thing. Alexandra, who was at the correct angle, could see 2 words. Not kind. Alexandra Holt felt something shift very slightly behind her sternum. It was not pity. She had no patience for pity. And this was not its texture. It was something else, recognition, perhaps, or the particular attention one pays when something familiar appears in an unexpected form. The program resumed. A woman from the foundation spoke about literacy rates in underserved communities. A video played. The room applauded in the way rooms applaud when they are moved, but not moved enough to put down their wine glasses. The girl with the notebook did not watch the video. She was writing something more complex now. Her pen moved in a focused, deliberate way that made her look older than 8. Alexandra found herself watching not the screen but the child. After a moment, the girl looked up. "Your necklace is really beautiful," she said. She was looking at Alexandra, directly, not with the calculated flattery of a child who had been taught to say nice things to adults, but with the particular straightforwardness of a person who sees something and says so. "Thank you," Alexandra said. "It looks like water." It was an aquamarine pendant, set in white gold, that Alexandra had bought for herself after closing her first 8-figure deal. Most people said it was lovely, or elegant, or stunning. No one had ever said it looked like water before. I think that's the most accurate description anyone's given it, Alexandra said. The girl nodded, satisfied, and returned to her notebook. What are you writing? Alexandra asked. She was not, generally, someone who initiated conversations with children. But the question came out before she decided to ask it. The girl considered whether to answer. This consideration was visible on her face. Brief, earnest, resolved. I'm writing down things I notice, she said. My dad says if you write down what you notice, you remember it better. And then later you can understand it. What have you noticed tonight? The girl looked around the room with the systematic gaze of someone conducting a survey. The woman in the red dress near the window keeps touching her necklace when she talks to the man beside her. I think she's nervous, but doesn't want to seem nervous. She paused. The man at the big table in the center, the one who keeps laughing, he's the loudest person in the room, but I don't think anyone is actually listening to him. Another pause. And the people at this table are being unkind to my dad, but they're doing it politely, so they probably think it doesn't count. The last sentence was delivered with the matter-of-fact clarity of a weather report. Alexandra looked at the man in the good suit. He was looking at his daughter. Something moved behind his eyes, a brief, complicated thing. Pride and pain occupying the same quarter second, and then he looked back at his plate. She's perceptive, Alexandra said. She is, he said. Pippa, the girl said, extending her hand toward Alexandra the way she'd been taught. Alexandra. They shook hands. Pippa's grip was firm, and she made eye contact, which was more than most adults managed. Do you know a lot about this foundation? Pippa asked. My dad helped start it, or helped fund it. I always get those words mixed up. Alexandra, still. She looked at the man. His expression had not changed. He was unhurried, unperturbed, still working through his second course, with the same methodical attention he had given to everything else. Is that right? Alexandra said. It was not a question. He glanced up at her then. The corner of his mouth moved not quite a smile, just a slight acknowledgement. The way a person looks when they've been caught at something minor they weren't trying particularly hard to conceal. Pippa, he said gently, let's let Miss Holt enjoy her dinner. Alexandra sat with that for a moment. He'd used her name. She had not introduced herself. The auction announcements began at 8:30. It was during this interval the natural pause of an event. When conversations shifted and staff moved between tables, and the ambient noise of the room rose and redistributed, that the cruelty, which had been operating at a careful low frequency, decided to increase its amplitude. His name, as Alexandra would learn later, was Nathan Calloway. She didn't know that yet. What she knew was that a man named Roger Fairfield, Courtney's husband, a large man with the kind of ruddy face that suggested either excellent circulation or a significant relationship with Scotch whiskey, materialized beside their table just as the serving staff were clearing plates. He had clearly come from Table 1. He wore his proximity to Table 1 like a garment. He did not address Nathan directly. He addressed Courtney. Court, I didn't realize this section was open to the public. He said it with the warmth of someone who considered himself charming, which is a particular kind of person because they are very often also cruel. Courtney Fairfield's laugh was practiced and brief. Gerald and Lynette gave up their seats, apparently, she said. Roger Fairfield looked at Nathan for the first time. His assessment was visible and took approximately 3 seconds. Then, he said, to no one in particular, Foundation must be doing outreach. Pippa's pen stopped moving. Nathan Calloway put down his fork. He did it quietly. The motion was contained, not aggressive, not theatrical, simply a person setting down a utensil in order to have his hands free. I'm sorry, Roger Fairfield said, in the tone of a man who is not sorry at all. I don't think I caught your name. Nathan, Nathan said. Nathan. Roger repeated the name as if tasting it and finding it undistinguished. And you're here because? Because I was invited, Nathan said. The simplicity of the answer seemed to briefly unsettle Roger, the way a judo move unsettles someone expecting a direct counter. Well? Roger said. Recovering. He looked at Pippa. and his expression arranged itself into something that was supposed to be avuncular. "And this must be my daughter," Nathan said. The words were flat and clear, and had a quality that was not quite a warning, but was close to one. Roger smiled. He looked at Courtney. Courtney looked at Diane Marsh. "It's a bit unusual," Roger said, "bringing children to these things. The Foundation has standards around." "Roger," Alexandra spoke. The table went still. Alexandra Holt's voice. When she chose to use it as an instrument, rather than just as speech, had a quality that people who worked with her described as gravitational. It did not rise. It did not harden. It simply settled into a frequency that made everything else in the range slightly quieter. "His daughter is not disrupting anyone," Alexandra said. "She has been, in fact, the most thoughtful person at this table all evening." Roger Fairfield looked at her. His assessment of her took 5 seconds, which was longer than Nathan's had taken, and ended in a different kind of calibration. "Alexandra," he said. "Right. The consultancy, that's right. I've always admired the independent path." He said independent in a way that suggested a different word. "I'm sure you have," Alexandra said. Roger Fairfield left the table. Courtney Fairfield looked at Alexandra with the expression of a woman recalculating an alliance. Pippa, under the table, reached for her father's hand. Nathan Calloway looked at Alexandra. It was a measured look, not warm, not grateful, just clear. The way you look at someone when you're deciding whether they acted from principle or from impulse. He was deciding which one it was. Alexandra looked back. She was deciding the same thing about herself. She watched him for the next 30 minutes with the particular attention she reserved for financial documents and closing arguments. What she had, by 9:10 p.m., was this: when the Foundation's chairwoman, Dr. Marguerite Holloway, made a reference to their investment strategy for the new education initiative, a strategy Alexandra herself had been consulted on. 3 months ago, as an external advisor, Nathan Calloway's expression registered something brief and specific. Not surprise. Not unfamiliarity. The opposite. The slight relaxation of recognition. The way an expert looks when a topic arrives that they know. When Preston Walsh made a confident, incorrect claim about the projected returns on a bond allocation within the Foundation's fund, a claim that was wrong in a specific way that only someone with access to the internal documents would know was wrong. Nathan said nothing, but he did look at Walsh for a moment, with the particular patience of someone who has decided it is not worth the time to correct a person who has confused confidence with knowledge. When a waiter, a young man who was visibly new and visibly nervous, nearly dropped a wine glass on Pippa, Nathan caught it. Not the glass, it didn't fall, but he moved his hand to the edge of the table in the half-second before the near miss, and then moved it back after, without comment. Without making the young man feel observed. Small things. The geometry of a person. "You know Dr. Holloway," Alexandra said. It was not a question. "We've met," Nathan said. "She smiled at you when she walked past the table earlier. People often smile," she said, and I'm quoting. "Nathan, I'm so glad you could make it tonight. A pause. People often say that too," he said. Alexandra looked at him. He looked at his daughter, who had fallen asleep in her chair. Her head tilted against his shoulder, and her notebook still in her lap. "You're not going to tell me," Alexandra said. "Tell you what?" She thought about the pale watch line on his wrist, about the suit that was good but not new, about the name the girl had called him my dad, without prefix, without qualifier in a room full of people who had prefixes. "Who you are," she said. He looked at her then. Steady, unhurried. "You seem to be figuring that out," he said. And then Pippa shifted in her sleep, and he reached up, without looking, and adjusted the angle of her head against his shoulder so her neck wouldn't hurt, and the motion was so automatic and so complete that Alexandra found herself looking away. There was a cough at the far end of the table. Diane Marsh had been watching this exchange with the alert expression of someone who has detected a shift in a room's dynamics and is recalibrating accordingly. She leaned toward Courtney Fairfield and said something that was intended to be private. "I don't know what she thinks she's doing," Diane said, with the particular clarity of a stage whisper. "Associating herself with whoever that is. Courtney was quiet. The Holbrooks are here tonight, Diane continued. And the Meridian people. She spent 3 years building a reputation at this event, and now she's— Diane, Courtney said. Her voice had changed. Diane stopped. Courtney was looking across the table at Nathan Calloway. Her expression had the quality of someone who has just remembered something important that they wish they had remembered earlier. I think, Courtney said, very carefully, that we should perhaps— She didn't finish the sentence, because Dr. Marguerite Holloway had stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room. Before we move to the final program of the evening, Dr. Holloway said, I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone who has asked very specifically not to be acknowledged. A ripple of curious laughter moved through the room. When this person came to me 18 months ago with a proposition that I initially thought was too good to be true, I told him I would need 6 weeks to consider it. He said he would give me the weekend. She smiled. He was right. I called him Sunday afternoon. The room was listening now. That particular quality of listening, where people set down glasses without meaning to. The Hargrove Foundation's capacity to expand our literacy program to 14 new cities next year. The capacity to reach 11,000 additional children exists because of a single commitment. A commitment that was made quietly, without announcement, and with one condition. She paused. The condition was that his name would not appear in any program materials, any press releases, or any donor recognition for a minimum of 3 years. When I asked him why, he said she looked down at a note card, and then looked up. He said, I want to see if the work stands on its own before we attach my name to it. The room was still. Tonight, Dr. Holloway said, he has agreed to let me introduce him. Largely, I suspect, because his daughter told him it would be good for the children to have a face to the foundation. She looked directly at table 4, Nathan Calloway. Would you come up? The silence that followed had a specific texture. It was the silence of a room, rearranging its understanding of an evening. Courtney Fairfield's hand had stopped moving. Her wine glass was suspended between the table and her mouth. Roger, somewhere in the room, could not be heard laughing. Preston Walsh had gone the specific color of someone who has just realized they've been confidently wrong in front of the people they most wanted to impress. Diane Marsh was looking at her plate. Nathan Calloway looked at Pippa. Pippa, who had woken up in the last 30 seconds, looked back at him with the expression of someone who knew this moment was coming and had decided, weeks ago, how she felt about it. Okay? He asked her. She nodded. He stood up. He did not adjust his tie. He did not straighten his jacket. He stood up the way he'd been sitting with the same unbothered, unadorned presence, and walked to the microphone, and the room's attention followed him the way a compass finds north. He stood at the microphone for a moment without speaking. It was not the pause of a man collecting his thoughts. It was the pause of a man deciding how much of himself this room deserved. When he spoke, his voice was the same as it had been at dinner. Level, unhurried, without performance. I'm going to make this brief, he said, because there's a 3rd grader at table 4 who has written 7 pages of notes tonight, and I think she deserves the last word more than I do. A laugh moved through the room, warmer than it had been all evening. I came to Dr. Holloway with this because my daughter had been working through a reading program in her school, a program similar to the ones the Hargrove Foundation runs, and one afternoon, she came home and told me that her friend, a girl named Clara, had cried that day because she finally finished her first chapter book. He stopped. I asked her what that felt like, to see that. She said, I think Clara always thought she couldn't, and now she knows she can. He paused again. Not for effect. I've spent most of my career in situations where people had access to things, information, resources, networks that other people didn't, and I've had a long time to think about what that does. To people who have it, and to people who don't. His eyes moved across the room. Access to reading is not a luxury. It's the thing before every other thing. It's the door in front of all the other doors. He looked at Pippa. That's why, he said. He stepped back from the microphone. The applause was not the polite, brief applause of a charity gala. It built from the back of the room, where the staff had gathered near the service doors to listen. And it came forward like water. Alexandra Holt clapped. She was precise and controlled in most physical expressions, And she still clapped. Pippa wrote something in her notebook. The post-program hour had the specific atmosphere of a room that was trying to recalibrate without appearing to. Several things happened in a compressed period of time. Roger Fairfield appeared at the edge of table 4 and said, to Nathan Calloway, "Incredible work, incredible. I've been following the Foundation's trajectory for years. Really remarkable in the tone of a man who was attempting to revise a memo he had written earlier in the evening." Nathan listened to him, said, "Thank you for coming," and turned back to his daughter. Preston Walsh, who had spent the dinner explaining growth capital to Alexandra, excused himself to find someone he'd just spotted across the room and did not return. Courtney Fairfield said nothing to Nathan Calloway, but before she left the table, she looked at Alexandra for a moment, not with hostility, not with apology, with something more uncomfortable than either: self-recognition. Then she moved away. Diane Marsh was simply gone. Dr. Holloway came to the table and spoke with Nathan for several minutes. She hugged Pippa, which Pippa allowed with the tolerant dignity of someone accustomed to being hugged by important people who meant well. Alexandra observed all of this from the same chair, her water glass unchanged, her posture unchanged, her internal temperature slightly different than it had been 3 hours ago. She was thinking about the pale line on his wrist. She had decided what it meant. He'd sold a company. Recently enough that the watch was recent, but long enough ago that he'd stopped replacing it. He'd had the kind of watch you get when you've arrived serious, understated, expensive, and then he'd taken it off at some point between arriving and this dinner. The suit that was good but not new. The single-parent dynamic. The braid that was functional rather than perfect. A man who had stepped back from something, not lost it, stepped back. Those were different geometries. She waited until the room had thinned to its last clusters before she said anything. "Calloway," she said. He turned to her. Pippa had her head on his shoulder again, genuinely asleep this time, her pen capped and her notebook closed. "Calloway Capital," Alexandra said. "You sold your stake 18 months ago. Before that, you ran the fund for 11 years. He looked at her. "That's a matter of public record," he said. "Mostly. What isn't public record," she said, "is what you did after. You disappeared. Completely. The industry spent about 6 weeks trying to figure out where you'd gone, and then moved on, because it always does. That was the intention," he said. "You came tonight deliberately," she said. "You could have made this contribution anonymously for another 2 years. You chose to come tonight. In that suit. With Pippa. At table 4. A long pause. "Someone told Dr. Holloway it would be good for donor confidence if I made a visible commitment this year," he said. She agreed. She arranged the seating. Alexandra looked at him. "You knew what that table would look like," she said. "I had some expectations," he said. "And you wanted to see what happened." He looked at her for a moment, that same measured, unhurried look from earlier in the evening. "I find that the rooms that are most comfortable tell you the least," he said. "And the rooms that are most uncomfortable tell you quite a lot." The last of the servers moved past them. Somewhere in the east corridor, a door closed. "What did this room tell you?" Alexandra asked. He was quiet for a moment. "That some people lead with who they think you are," he said. "And some people wait." He didn't say which category she was in. He didn't need to. What happened next happened without Nathan Calloway. He had gone to take Pippa to the car. She was asleep on his shoulder, and had been for 20 minutes, and he moved her with the ease of a man who had carried a sleeping child many times before, and Alexandra had walked with them to the lobby, where the doorman had recognized Nathan before Nathan had said anything, and had called a car from a service that Alexandra recognized as the kind that required an account, not an app. In the lobby, Pippa had woken briefly. She'd looked at Alexandra with the focused, slightly unfocused eyes of someone halfway between sleep and waking. "I'm glad you sat with us," Pippa said. "I'm glad too," Alexandra said. "I wrote about you," Pippa said. "What did you write?" Pippa thought about it. "That you looked like you were used to being in rooms like that," she said. "But that you notice things the same way I do." The car arrived. Nathan settled Pippa in the back seat, buckled her with the practiced speed of routine, and straightened up. Alexandra was standing on the hotel steps. The evening air had the particular quality of April in Chicago, cold enough to be present, not cold enough to be hostile. The Whitmore Grand glowed behind her. Inside that building, she knew, things were continuing. The recalibration was ongoing. By morning, the story would have moved through the industry's channels. Nathan Calloway had surfaced. He'd been at the Hargrove Gala. He'd made a commitment of the kind that made board members pay attention. He was not, as had been assumed, retired. He was something more deliberate than retired, and Alexandra Holt had sat beside him all evening. Some people would read that as coincidence. Some would read it as strategy. Some, the ones who had been watching closely enough, would read it as what it actually was. Two people at the same table, neither one performing. He didn't get back in the car immediately. He closed the door, with Pippa inside and the window between them, and turned back to the steps. "Thank you," he said. "I didn't do anything," Alexandra said. "You said something." That was something. She considered disagreeing and decided not to. She had said something. She'd said it because it was accurate. And she generally said accurate things. Whether it was courage or efficiency depended on the framing. And she was not particularly interested in the framing. "Pippa's remarkable," she said instead. Something in his face, not the controlled, level surface of the evening, but something underneath it shifted briefly. "She is," he said. "She keeps me honest." Which is a heavy job for an 8-year-old. She seems to carry it well. "Better than I deserve," he said. "She's why I left. The fund, the schedule, the everything. She was 6, and I realized I had missed more of her life than I'd been present for, and that I'd done it with the full belief that I was doing it for her." He paused. That's the most common lie people tell themselves in this industry. That the accumulation is for someone else. The car idled quietly at the curb. Inside, Pippa's silhouette was small against the far window. "What did you do after?" Alexandra asked. "Slept," he said. "Read." "Made lunches." He looked briefly toward the car. "Learned how to braid hair. Badly, but sincerely." "Sincerely counts for more than you'd think," Alexandra said. He looked at her. There was a quality to his looking that was different from the way most people looked at you. It was attentive without being invasive. Present without presuming. "What you said about Dr. Holloway setting the seating," Alexandra said. "You said she arranged it. She gave me table 4. Yes. And you knew what that meant. I had expectations. And you sat there for 3 hours and let people be what they were. People tell you more when they don't think you're watching," he said. "And they tell you the most when they're certain there's nothing to lose. And what did you learn tonight?" He glanced back at the lobby doors, through which, just visible, the last clusters of the gala's attendees were dispersing. "That Roger Fairfield will call my office Monday morning," he said. "That Diane Marsh will tell 3 people she always thought there was something interesting about me. That Preston Walsh will mention he knows me at the next event he attends." He paused, "None of which is particularly interesting. And that the person who saw the most clearly, this evening, was 8 years old and wrote it all down in a notebook." He paused, "And that some people don't wait to know who you are before they decide whether you're worth protecting." Alexandra looked out at the street. A cab moved past, unhurried. "That's not protection," she said. "That's just observation followed by a reasonable response. Most people don't do it. Most people aren't paying attention." "No," he said. "They're not." The word they included, an implicit you. And they both heard it, and neither commented on it, because some things are more clearly said in the negative space around language than in language itself. The Whitmore Grand's revolving door turned. 2 women came out, still in their gowns, laughing about something. They glanced at Nathan and Alexandra on the steps, and one of them, young, attentive, did a brief double take at Nathan. Recognition catching before she could decide what to do with it. They moved past. "You'll be busy Monday," Alexandra said. "I will. The industry has a long memory. The industry has a short memory of what actually matters, and a long memory of what doesn't," he said, "which is a problem I spent 11 years inside of and some years outside of, and I am now more interested in problems that go the other way. Like literacy programs. Like a lot of things," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card. It was plain, not the embossed, double-thickness, type-designed cards of people who wanted you to feel their importance. but a simple white card, with a name and a number. Nathan Calloway, NC Capital. If you want to talk about it, he said. Not call me in the way people said call me at events like this, with the implicit acknowledgement that no call would come, and none was truly expected. He said it the way he said everything else plainly, with the information required, and nothing added for appearance. Alexandra took the card. I might, she said. She put it in her clutch, not the outer pocket, the inner one. He got into the car. Pippa, still asleep, had shifted to lean against the opposite window. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly and moved into the street, and the Whitmore Grand's lights moved across its roof, and then it was gone. Alexandra stood on the steps for a moment. The gala behind her was finishing. Somewhere inside, Roger Fairfield was laughing at something again. The auction items would be packed up. The foundation's chairwoman would be going over the numbers with her staff. The evening would be remembered as successful, which is what all such evenings were called. She thought about what Pippa had written in her notebook. Not kind. 2 words. The economy of a person who had been taught that what you write down is what you keep, and therefore to keep only what was true. She thought about the watch line on his wrist, about the braid that was sincere if not precise, about 11,000 children in 14 cities and one condition. Let the work stand on its own first. The things people choose to do when they no longer have anything to prove. She thought about what she had, and how she had gotten it, and who she had been in rooms like this one over the years, what she had calculated, what she had measured, what she had decided not to see, in order to remain comfortable in the rooms where comfort was available. The revolving door turned behind her. The last guests came out. She walked to the curb. Her car arrived in 4 minutes. In the back seat, she took out the card, held it for a moment in the dark. NC Capital. She thought, the work standing on its own is the only version of it worth anything. She put the card back in the inner pocket. Outside, Chicago moved past in its ordinary, indifferent, beautiful way. All lit windows and late cabs, and the deep hum of a city doing what cities do, which is continue without comment through all the small reversals and recognitions that happen inside the buildings that line its streets. The evening had gone the way evenings sometimes do when you are not watching for what you expected to see. It had shown you something else entirely, and the most precise observation of the whole night had been made by a girl with a notebook and a bitten pen cap who had written, at some point between the main course and the program, in handwriting that was better than most adults. The man they thought was nobody turned out to be somebody, but I think the reason is that he already knew he was somebody. The rest of them just forgot.